Hi Bobcats, this is Miss Lee, and this video is on modeling decimal multiplication. Okay, before we begin with the multiplication of decimals, we need to go ahead and have a quick review. First of all, let's talk about place values. If you'll recall, in elementary we mainly worked with whole numbers. And then once you started to get into 4th, 5th grade, you started talking about the parts, the values that were less than one whole. And all of those values went to the right of what we call a decimal point. So if I have 2.5, it would be 2 decimal 5/10. 2 and 5800ths would be like this, 2 and 5800ths, where the last digit would be in the hundreds place. We also learned that when we want to add numbers together that have parts or subtract them, that we needed to line up the decimal point. If you wanted to add 2 and 5800ths plus 3/10, you don't line it up like this because you end up adding the hundredths with a tenths place, and that's not right because they're not the same size. So you learned that we had to go and line up the decimal points. 2.58 and then 3 and 1/10 would be like this, and then you would just annex a 0 here. That way you're adding hundreds place to hundreds place, tenths place to tenths place, whole or ones place to ones place. Well, it's a little bit different with multiplying and dividing. And as we go through this video and do these models, one of the things that I want you to really focus on is the placement of the decimal point in our answer, in our product. Before we do that, just a quick review. We have one whole grid right here, and a tenth would be 10 little squares. This would be a tenth. You could have a tenth go horizontally as well, and then the little squares represent 100th. Okay, let's get started. You will need your notes. And there was an error when they copied the notes. So the models actually start on page 2. So look for the page 2 that starts with the modeling like this. We're going to model whole number times decimal first. Okay, example number 1, 4 times 1/10. Okay, this means, and fill in the blanks, that we want 4 groups of 1/10. So each of these squares are going to represent a group. So I have 4 groups, and inside each group I want to put 1/10 because that's the size that it tells us. So if I have, so you're going to want to draw it. I might be better off drawing it also. There we go. Okay, so if I have 4 groups and each group has 1/10, what is the total that I have? Well, I have 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. So 4/10 is my answer. So 4 times 1/10 equals 4/10. Notice the placement of the decimal point in our answer. Notice your factors. Remember, in a whole number, the decimal point goes to the right of the whole number. Okay, so now let's do another example. 3 times 500ths. This means 3 groups of 500ths. So I'm actually going to draw it instead of trying to move them, and you need to draw it as well. Here are the 3 groups. Each group, the size of each group is 500ths. So we need 5 of the little squares. And we're going to draw this in each group. And there we go. There are the 3 groups of 500ths. Now we want to know what the total is. Well, here's 500ths, 10 hundredths, 15 hundredths. So we have 15 hundredths. So 3 times 500ths equals 15 hundredths. Do you see a pattern for the placement of the decimal point? Look at your factors. 4 times 1/10. My answer was 4/10. 3 times 5/100. Our answer was 15/100. Okay, let's keep going. Now we're going to multiply decimals that are less than 1. So you're going to do some shading here. If you have colored pencils, you can use colored pencils. If you want to use highlighters, you can use highlighters. You can use your pencil. Just maybe do different types of shading. Okay, our first problem is 5/10 times 8/10. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade 5/10. And remember, a tenth is a whole row or a whole column. I'm actually going to do rows. So there's 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, and 5/10. So shade 5/10 or 5 rows. Now since I did the 5/10 going horizontally, I'm going to do my 8/10 vertically in the opposite direction. So 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8/10. And the area where the shading overlaps, that's our answer. And you can tell because my color is a little bit different. So my darker purple is my answer. So if I add them up, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 times 8 is 40 hundredths. 40 little squares, 40 hundred squares, 40 hundredths. So there's our answer right there. And I'm actually going to write it in also. All right, let's try another one. 3/10 times 6/10. So I'm going to start with my 3/10, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. Since I went horizontally, my 6/10 is going to go vertically. So how many columns do I need? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the area that overlaps where you shaded both is going to be the answer. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 hundredths. 18 hundredths. Let me write it in. Let's try another one. This time we have a whole number. 1 4/10 times 6/10. 1 4/10 times 6/10. So I need one whole, so I need to shade one whole square, and then 4/10 of the second whole. So there's 1/10, 2, 3, 4/10. This is one whole and 4/10. Now I'm going to multiply it going the opposite direction by 6/10. So now we're going to go vertically and we're going to do 6/10, shade 6/10 in both of the holes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And let's see how many we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 10 is going to be 60. And then down here, 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which would be 24. So we have 60 hundredths, 24 hundredths, that's a total of 84 hundredths. And I'm just going to write it in. Okay, so now let's really focus on the placement of the decimal. When we have, let's go all the way back to our first model. When we had 4 holes times 1/10, our answer was in the tenths place. When we had 3 holes times 5 hundredths, our answer was in the hundredths place. So why do you think that is? Why was our answer in the tenths? Why was it in the 15ths? Because in example 1, one of the factors was in the tenths place. Was there a decimal in the 4 hole? No, there was no part to the 4, it was just a whole number. Same thing down here, the 3 is just a whole number, there are no decimal place values. But in this factor, it goes to the hundredths. So our answer was in the hundredths. Okay, now let's look at our newer models here. Here they both had decimals, 5/10 and 8/10. Was our answer in the tenths? No, it was in the hundredths place. What about this one? We had tenths times tenths, and our answer was in the hundredths. Ooh. What's 10 times 10? 100, right? So what is a tenths place times another tenths place? A hundredths place. Let's try this one. 1 and 4/10, so we have a tenth, times 6/10 times another tenth. And a tenth times a tenth is a hundred. Is that what our answer was here? Yes, it was in the hundredths place. So we can go ahead and write a rule so that we can multiply without doing the models. And the rule would be the number of decimal places in the product is the sum of the decimal places in the factors. Remember, the factors are the numbers that you're multiplying together. Okay, so go ahead and fill this out in your notes. This is on page 1 of the notes now. The number of decimal places in the product is the sum of the decimal places in the factors. So let's go check it out. Here are two factors, 4 and 1/10. How many decimal places are there? There's only one in this factor. There's not a decimal place in the 4 because it's a whole number. Because there's one decimal place, we need to have one decimal place in our answer, and we do. Here, again, a whole number, so there are no decimal places. How many decimal places are there in 500ths? There's 1, there's 2. How many decimal places were in our answer? 2. 5/10, 8/10. One decimal place in the first factor, one decimal place in the second factor. So the sum of the decimal places is going to be 2. So looking down here in our answer, 40 hundredths, there were 2 decimal places. 3/10 times 6/10. There's one decimal place in the first factor, one decimal place in the second factor. So we need to have 2 decimal places in our answer. And did we? We sure did. And our last example. One decimal place in the first factor, one decimal place in the second factor equals 2 decimal places. Did we have 2 decimal places? Yes, we did. So our rule is true. And this is how we're going to multiply and determine the decimal placement in our answer. So that's going to be part 2, our second video. Nice job, Bobcats.